For centuries, Bedlam was known for chaos, cruelty, and hopelessness. But the records hide something different: resistance. Patients fought back. Some challenged their doctors. Some staged escapes. Some exposed the corruption that kept them locked inside. Their stories reveal a side of Bedlam most history books ignore: a battle for freedom, fought by the very people the world dismissed as incurable. Bedlam was never meant to be escaped. Thick walls, heavy locks, crowded rooms where one person's panic set off a chain reaction. Officials called it a hospital. Patients knew better. They lived through cold winters with thin blankets, punishments disguised as treatments, and a daily routine built to break the mind before the body. Yet even in a place designed to crush hope, something else survived: questions, doubts, silent plans, a spark of rebellion that the staff didn't see coming. Resistance didn't start with grand escape plans. It began with the smallest acts: a patient refusing to follow an order or hiding tools that staff tried to take away. Tiny disruptions that chipped at the routine Bedlam depended on. Some patients used art as their shield: sketches that showed what really happened behind closed doors, poems that disguised anger as nonsense, even letters that slipped past guards and reached families who thought their loved ones were being cared for. Each small act exposed something the staff feared: that their control wasn't complete. Not everyone settled for small acts of resistance. Some pushed further, testing the limits of Bedlam's walls and the patience of its guards. A few patients studied guard routines with military precision. They memorized meal times, shift changes, even the sound of keys. One man used scraps of wire to pick a lock he'd watched for months. Another slipped into the laundry carts that rolled out of the building every morning. The hardest part wasn't running. It was getting past the terror drilled into them, the belief that escape was impossible. But for a moment, some tasted freedom, even if the chase wasn't far behind. Not every escape ended with someone living on a run. Some patients were released, and they refused to stay silent afterward. For the first time, they had something Bedlam couldn't take from them: a voice the outside world could hear. They wrote letters to newspapers describing crowded cells, violent restraints, and the way staff punished anyone who dared to speak up. Some letters were ignored, but others caused public outrage. Londoners who had once joked about Bedlam suddenly realized the truth was worse than the rumors. A few former patients went even further. They appeared in courtrooms, standing face to face with the very doctors who had dismissed them as unfit. Their testimonies broke through years of secrecy, exposing punishments hidden behind medical language. Others teamed up with early reformers, inspectors, writers, even politicians who had tried for years to investigate Bedlam but were turned away. With patient stories in hand, these outsiders finally had proof that couldn't be buried. This wasn't just personal revenge, it was pressure. Pressure strong enough to force the public to question how many people had been locked away simply because they were poor, inconvenient, or misunderstood. Through their courage, the cracks in Bedlam's system became impossible to hide, and the era of silent suffering began to crumble. And this wasn't just personal revenge. It was pressure. Pressure aimed at a system that hid behind locked doors and medical titles. Pressure strong enough to force the public to ask dangerous questions. How many people had been locked away because they were poor? How many because they were inconvenient? And how many because society found it easier to confine someone than to understand them? These stories didn't fix everything overnight, but they pushed the first cracks into a wall that had stood untouched for centuries. They made silence impossible. They forced lawmakers to confront the truth. And they showed the world that the people inside Bedlam were not passive victims, but the very voices who helped end an era of unchecked abuse. Through their courage, the illusion of Bedlam's authority began to crumble, and the era of silent suffering finally met its breaking point. And the shock didn't stop there. Families who had accepted vague letters about treatment started demanding answers. Crowds gathered outside the gates, hoping to glimpse loved ones they hadn't seen in years. When guards refused entry, the crowds pushed back, shouting questions that Bedlam had never been forced to answer. Public fear turned into anger. Newspapers ran stories with headlines that accused the institution of treating people like prisoners. Some articles printed patient testimonies word for word, describing cold cells, restraints used without reason, and punishments delivered for speaking out of turn. Readers who once laughed about Bedlam now saw something terrifying, that anyone could end up inside those walls, forgotten by everyone except those who profited from their silence. And this wasn't just personal revenge, it was pressure. Pressure aimed at a system that hid behind locked doors and medical titles. Pressure strong enough to force the public to ask dangerous questions. How many people had been locked away because they were poor? How many because they were inconvenient? And how many because society found it easier to confine someone than to understand them? The public shock was only the beginning. As the report spread, pressure shifted to those in power. Government officials who had once dismissed concerns suddenly found themselves cornered. Some denied everything, calling the testimonies misinterpretations. Others scrambled to protect their reputations, insisting they had never been told what was happening behind Bedlam's doors. Reformers pushed harder. Using patient stories as evidence, they demanded full inspections, real ones, not the staged visits Bedlam's staff had mastered. For the first time, investigators were allowed past the usual hallways into the forgotten wings where conditions were worst. What they found matched the testimonies almost exactly. Inside the institution, panic spread. Some staff destroyed records. Others blamed patients, calling them unstable liars. A few quietly stepped forward and admitted what they had seen, too afraid to speak earlier, but now unable to deny the truth. And Bedlam itself began to crack. Public tours were shut down. Funding was questioned. Doctors were forced to defend their methods in front of people who no longer believed a word they said. The institution that had once felt untouchable suddenly looked fragile. But the strongest force came from the stories behind the reform. The human cost. A former patient who testified despite threats from staff. A family reunited after years of believing their son was beyond help. A woman whose escape revealed dozens of neglected patients hidden from view. These moments carried a weight statistics couldn't. They made the fight personal. They showed that the people inside Bedlam weren't nameless, faceless lunatics. They were individuals who had been silenced, forgotten, or punished for being different.